In November 2014, in the rugged canyons of the Sheep Ridge, just 12 miles from the secret Nellis Air Force Base and the legendary AREA-51, one of the most mysterious search operations in Nevada's history will unfold. 47-year-old YouTuber and adventurer Kenny Witch, known online as Snakebit McGee, will embark on a solo hike to prove the existence of a mystical cave and disappear without a trace. However, the central tragedy of this story is not that the Mojave Desert swallowed a man, but what will be revealed about his last months of life, which will turn this desperate rescue operation into the unraveling of a carefully planned finale. The story of Kenny Witch is the story of a man who wore two masks. The first was his online avatar, Snakebit McGee. He was a charismatic, witty, and fearless desert cowboy. A man who grew up in Las Vegas and has used the Mojave as his playground since childhood. He was an old-school adventurer who boasted of hiking 20 miles without equipment, sleeping under the stars, and finding solace in collecting treasures from ghost towns. He didn't get his nickname by accident. In his youth, during one of his games with death, he was actually bitten by a rattlesnake. Kenny survived and turned the incident into part of his personal mythology. He was a man who looked danger in the face and laughed. On his YouTube channel, he was an epic storyteller, a symbol of freedom and wildness. But there was a second mask, the real Kenny Witch. This Kenny was a broken, tormented man. His public image was just a facade hiding decades of chronic depression. This darkness was his legacy. When Kenny was a teenager, his father committed suicide, and the trauma left an unhealed scar. According to his girlfriend, Sherian Pilgrim, Kenny viewed his depression fatalistically, comparing it to missing an arm. You just get used to it and move on. He categorically refused therapy or medication. Instead, he escaped his pain into the wilderness, using adventure as a form of self-medication. For a long time, this balance was kept afloat by stability. For over 20 years, Kenny worked as a coffee machine service technician. It was a predictable, reliable job with a pension plan and insurance. But the routine was suffocating him. In 2013, he made an impulsive decision. He quit his job to pursue the American dream, to become an independent inventor. That dream quickly turned into a financial nightmare. His ideas were naive and eccentric: a glow-in-the-dark polar bear, a new toilet paper holder. He invested all his savings, including his retirement savings, in these projects. He even made video presentations for the popular show Shark Tank, hoping for a miracle. But the investors didn't respond. By 2014, Kenny Witch was broke. He lost more than just money. He was losing his future. It was at this moment, in June 2014, when the real Kenny Witch was drowning, that Snakebit McGee made his most powerful statement. In the comments under the video about AREA-51, he wrote a story that changed everything. He recounted how, during one of his hikes near Nellis Air Force Base, he stumbled upon a hidden cave. The entrance, he said, was shaped like a perfect capital letter M. He always explored every cave he found. Still, when he tried to enter this one, something inexplicable happened. His whole body, he claimed, began to vibrate violently. The closer he got, the stronger the vibration became. Suddenly, he was overcome by such primal fear that he turned and ran. This, he said, was the strangest thing that had ever happened to him. This comment blew up the internet. For Kenny, whose real life was falling apart, the online world suddenly gave him what he craved: attention and confirmation of his heroic status. Cave M became his MacGuffin. It wasn't just a hike. It was a chance to prove that he, the failed inventor, was still the legendary Snakebit McGee. The pressure was mounting. Skeptics on the internet immediately called his story a fabrication and him a liar seeking attention. For a man with an ego as fragile as Kenny's, this was a direct challenge. He accepted it. He promised to return, find Cave M, and this time go inside. This time, he wrote, I'll have my 9mm with me. On 18 October 2014, he uploaded a 22-minute video to his channel titled Hike to Cave M. It was pure showmanship. Kenny was at the peak of his online persona. Alone with a camera in his hand, he walked through the wild canyons of Sheep Ridge. He was relaxed, charismatic, and enthusiastic. He joked about the difficulties of the upcoming descent, motivating himself with a cold beer at the end of the journey, and excitedly showed how far he had gone. He behaved not like a man facing his greatest fear, but like a showman entertaining an audience. But there was one catch. He never found the cave. In the video, he examined several small depressions in the rocks, but only shook his head, saying, "Not it." The video ended with him returning to his car. He had failed. And then YouTube's paradoxical logic kicked in. His failure, his honest admission that he couldn't find the mystical place, caused a sensation. It seemed too real to be a lie. The video went viral. In a short time, his channel grew from 0 to 40,000 subscribers. Kenny got the dose of fame he craved, but with it came a new wave of criticism. Now he was being called a liar even louder. To thousands of new subscribers, he was the guy who didn't find the cave. The pressure on Kenny, already crushed by financial ruin, became unbearable. He had to prove he wasn't a liar. He had to find that cave. The pressure from internet skeptics was just the tip of the iceberg. Under the mask of Snakebit McGee, an absolute tragedy was unfolding, and it had nothing to do with caves. Kenny Witch was at rock bottom. His impulsive resignation in 2013 and his desperate pursuit of the American dream had ended in complete failure. He had burned through all his savings and retirement funds, trying to launch naive inventions that never attracted investors. Kenny, who had prided himself on his independence his entire life, was now not just bankrupt, he was also homeless. He was trapped. In the fall of 2014, in the very weeks when he was preparing for his second expedition to M Cave, he made a last-ditch attempt to save himself. He put his house in Las Vegas up for sale. It wasn't just a house. It was his fortress, his pride and joy, a place he had spent decades building with his own hands, putting his entire eccentric soul into the decor. But the terms of the sale were not just unusual. They were extraordinary. They were at the height of desperation. Kenny Vitch offered a deal that smacked of utter humiliation. The buyer would get the house, but would be obliged to hire Kenny as a caretaker, cleaner, and handyman, allowing him to continue to live on site. He was literally trying to sell himself as a servant in his own home, just so he wouldn't end up on the street, just so he could maintain his last connection to the world he had built. The deal fell through. No one responded. For a man whose inner darkness was fueled by the trauma of his father's suicide, this was the end. He lost more than just money. He lost his dignity. The only thing he had left was his online persona, Snakebit McGee. And when internet trolls started calling him a liar, they struck a blow to the last support that kept Kenny Visha from falling into the abyss. At 6 o'clock in the morning on 10 November 2014, the air above Las Vegas was cold and clear. In Sheep Mountain, the weather that day was the perfect two-faced enemy, a classic trap of the Mojave Desert. During the day, it promised comfort, around 69.8 degrees Fahrenheit, creating an illusion of safety. But as soon as the sun touched the horizon, the temperature would plummet to 35.6 degrees Fahrenheit. It was an environment that could kill an unprepared person in a single night. Kenny told his girlfriend, Sherry Pilgrim, that he was going on a short overnight hike to try to find the cave again. His words sounded calm but detached. He moved through the house with a cold, detached determination. He walked down the hallway, past the storage room where his hiking backpack and sleeping bag, designed for the desert's freezing nights, lay. He didn't open the door. He walked to the closet where his caving gear was stored. Flashlights, ropes, a helmet. He didn't touch them. He took only his 9mm pistol and some water. Kenny Vitch, an experienced hiker who knew very well what 35.6 degree AF without fire or shelter meant, was consciously walking to his death from hypothermia. But the main piece of evidence, the smoking gun of this scene, was lying on the kitchen table. His video camera, the very tool that was the sole reason for this expedition. The same lens that was supposed to capture M. Cave and prove him right to his 40,000 subscribers. The man who set out to prove something to the internet left the only way to do so at home. He looked at the camera and left the house, leaving it lying on the table. He got into his truck and drove north toward Sheep Ridge. This time, he wasn't going to film anything. It wasn't a show. It was a personal finale. The evening of 10th of November passed. Kenny's phone remained silent. Then the whole day of 11th of November passed. Sherry and Pilgrim, who knew about his depression, his financial problems, and his recent talk of suicide, felt panic rising. Her calls went unanswered. On 12th of November, 48 hours after he left, she called the Las Vegas Police Department to report him missing. For rescuers, it was the worst-case scenario, 48 hours in the Mojave Desert in November. They knew full well that the chances of finding him alive were slim. 2 nights at 35.6 degree AF, without a sleeping bag or shelter, almost guaranteed fatal hypothermia. A search and rescue operation was immediately launched. Volunteers from the Red Rock team, experienced climbers and hikers who knew these mountains like the back of their hands, took charge of coordination. The clock was ticking. This was no longer a rescue mission. It was a race against time to find a body. Kenny's truck was quickly found. It was parked at the entrance to Joe May Canyon, the exact spot where he had started his hike to Cave M a month earlier. This gave the searchers a starting point, but it was almost useless. Before them lay Sheep Ridge. This is not a park. It is a hostile, isolated wilderness enclave. Dozens of square miles of vertical cliffs, narrow canyons where echoes distort sounds, and rocky scree slopes where shadows can hide anything, and of course, mines. It was a land riddled with the legacy of old miners. There were about 300,000 abandoned mines throughout Nevada, and hundreds of them were hidden right here, camouflaged by bushes or shadows. It was a minefield. For the 30 volunteers, this was not just a search operation. It was a nightmare. Every step on an unfamiliar slope could be their last. They were looking for a man, trying not to join him. They combed the canyons on foot. A helicopter scanned the area from the air, but its blades only kicked up dust. The desert did not give up its secrets. There were no traces. Not a shred of clothing, not a trace of a shoe, not a food wrapper. The Mojave wind erases tracks almost instantly. A week passed. Every morning the rescuers went out in search. Every evening they returned to camp, and team leader Dave Cummings heard the same report. Nothing. They followed the route of his October video, but found nothing. The trail hadn't just gone cold, it had never been there. 12 days passed. Hope was fading. The active search phase was coming to an end. It seemed as if Kenny Vitch had simply vanished into thin air. He hadn't just disappeared, he had evaporated. 12 days had passed. 22nd of November 2014. The active phase of the search was winding down. Hope of finding Kenny alive had evaporated. Now the volunteers were looking for at least a body to give the family an answer. It was at this moment, when despair had almost taken over, that one of the volunteers, Red Rock, who was combing the slope away from the main route, noticed something strange. It was not a backpack, a shoe, or a body. At the very edge of an old vertical shaft, an ominous black hole in the rock, a cell phone lay on a rock. It was Kenny Vitch's phone. The scene was utterly wrong. The phone was not broken, as it would have been after a fall. It had not been thrown. It had been carefully placed on the rock, screen up. And next to it, as if part of some ritual, was a handful of coins scattered around. This was not the scene of a tragedy. It looked like a staging, a deliberately left message. The phone lay like a pointer, like a decoy, pointing straight down into the 330-foot darkness. The discovery immediately changed the course of the operation. The PSO team, including their commander, Dave Cummings, was pulled to this point. Now they had the epicenter. It seemed that the mystery was about to be solved. A tense, professional silence reigned at the edge of the mine. This was the moment the volunteers had been waiting for and dreading. The shaft was old, its walls unstable, and toxic gas could have accumulated at the bottom. It was too dangerous to send a person down. Instead, the team deployed special equipment. A high-resolution camera attached to a long, nearly 330-foot cable was put to use. The volunteers secured the cable. The camera turned on, and its dim spotlight pierced the darkness. Slowly, foot by foot, they began to lower it into the throat of the Mojave. Only bare, uneven walls flashed across the monitor. The cable unraveled, and the shaft seemed to have no bottom. Finally, at about 330 feet, the camera touched the floor. The bottom appeared on the monitor. Dust, rocks, debris from an old tree, and nothing else. Nobody, no backpack, no gun. Slowly, painfully slowly, the camera began to be raised back up. When it reappeared on the surface, the team looked at each other, the same unspoken question in their eyes. The shaft was empty. Dave Cummings, commander of the Red Rock Search and Rescue Team, later articulated this paradox in an official report. "We found his cell phone near a very vertical old shaft," he said, "and we can't find any other trace." It was a turning point. The most obvious, most straightforward, and most logical version, that Kenny had fallen into the shaft he himself had pointed out in his video, had just crumbled to dust. His phone was a decoy. The altar near the shaft was a false lead. This was no accident. It was a puzzle. The ground search operation was over. Now the investigation began, and its object was no longer Sheepridge, but the mind of Kenny Vitch himself. As news of the empty mine spread across the internet, spawning a new wave of wild theories about portals, aliens, and secret military bases, Sherry and Pilgrim watched it all with quiet pain. She knew Kenny better than anyone. She knew his second mask. She had seen his financial collapse. She had heard him talk about suicide, and she knew about the two things he had left at home, his sleeping bag and his video camera. Unable to remain silent any longer, Sherian went to YouTube. She opened the famous video, Hike to Cave M, and among thousands of comments about vibrations and AREA-51, left her own. This comment became the key to the mystery. "I want you to know," she wrote, "I don't believe Kenny had an accident. I believe he committed suicide." She laid out her logic with the cold clarity of someone who had already played out this scenario 1,000 times in her head. She wrote about his long struggle with depression, about his refusal to seek help. She pointed to facts that searchers couldn't have known. He also didn't take his video camera with him on this trip. Sherian wrote, "It stayed at his house. That means he had no intention of filming anything." She also explained the mystery of the phone at the mine. It was not the site of the tragedy. It was a diversionary tactic. In her opinion, Kenny deliberately left it there so that he could not be tracked by GPS. He knew the searchers would focus on this mine, which would give him time. Time to go where he would definitely not be found. Sherian's comment wasn't just a theory, it was evidence. She talked about what happened when the cameras were off, when Snakebit McGee gave way to a broken Kenny. She told of his despair after his inventions failed, of his humiliation after his failed attempt to sell the house. His departure into the desert was not an impulse. It was a carefully thought-out plan. And to prove it, she quoted his own words, a chilling phrase that Kenny uttered in one of their last quiet conversations. Discussing his depression and the futility of his attempts to escape, he looked at her and said, "If I ever decide to do it, no one will ever find me." It wasn't a confession. It was a promise. And at that moment, the whole mystery of Kenny Vick fell into place. This was not a story about a man who got lost in the desert. This was a story about a man who used all of his 20 years of experience, all of his knowledge of canyons, caves, and mines to disappear. He used the desert not as a playground, but as a tool. He applied his survival skills to ensure his own death. The altar at the mine was not just a false trail, it was the final trick. Snakebit McGee's last, mocking performance. He sent 30 volunteers, a helicopter, and the entire internet on a false trail. At the same time, he himself went in the other direction, to the place he had chosen for his finale, to the place where, as he promised, no one would ever find him. The active search was called off on 26 November 2014, 16 days after Kenny's disappearance. Officially, the case remains open, but with the note, "Trail Gone Cold." For authorities and those seeking a simple explanation, the accident theory remains the dominant one. It is logical and statistically probable. Yes, the mine where the phone was found was empty, but Ovechi Ridge, as we remember, is a minefield. It covers thousands of hectares, riddled with hundreds of other unknown and unmapped vertical traps. According to this theory, Kenny simply continued on his way and carelessly fell into another mine. He could have slipped in a narrow canyon, fallen into a camouflage hole, and died from injuries or hypothermia long before anyone even started looking for him. This version closes the case, but it leaves the central, most uncomfortable question unanswered. If it was an accident, why did he leave his phone and a handful of coins at this empty mine? Why this ritual altar? The accident version does not withstand this evidence. It is too simple for such a complex story. The honest answer lies not in the mines, but in psychology. The version put forward by Sherian Pilgrim was not just a theory. It was the only explanation that tied everything together. It explained his chronic depression, fueled by the trauma of his father's suicide. It explained his despair after complete financial ruin and his humiliating attempt to sell himself and his house. It explained why he left his sleeping bag at home when he set out into the freezing night. And, most importantly, it demonstrated the absence of a camera. He didn't need to prove anything because he wasn't coming back. The altar at the mine was his last brilliant move. It was a way to send everyone on a wild goose chase so he could fulfill his promise. If I decide to do this, no one will ever find me. The case seemed closed. A tragic but frighteningly logical story about a man who used the desert to write his own unreadable obituary. If not for one but. 4 years later, in 2018, surveillance cameras at an esoteric shop in Las Vegas, owned by Kenny's brother, recorded a nighttime robbery. This was no ordinary robbery. The grainy 42-second recording shows a figure in dark clothing breaking in. He doesn't panic. He doesn't look for the cash register. He moves with the confidence of someone who knows the place. He walks confidently to a table, rummages through 2 specific areas, ignoring all the valuables around him. Then he grabs only the iPad and disappears into the night. After watching this video, the family was certain. The gait, the height, the mannerisms, it was Kenny. This evidence blew the case wide open again. The staged death theory was no longer a myth. It's a Hollywood ending. Kenny, crushed by debt, faked his death, fled, possibly to Mexico, and 4 years later returned to retrieve the device for anonymous communication with the world. But the Las Vegas police did not find sufficient grounds for action in this video. So who is Kenny Vick? A brilliant manipulator who ran away from his life, or a tragic soul crushed by depression who fulfilled his last promise? There is still no clear answer. Kenny Vick's body has never been found, and of course, M Cave has not been found either. Dozens of enthusiasts and YouTubers combed Sheep Ridge with drones, GPS, and thermal imaging cameras. They found nothing. Perhaps the cave never existed. So what is M Cave? What kind of vibration did Kenny feel that day? Was it a real, physical vibration from secret tests at Nellis Air Force Base, just 12 miles away? Or was it a vibration that Kenny Veach had long felt inside himself? An echo of financial ruin, an echo of childhood trauma, an echo of the deep depression he was so desperately trying to escape. In the end, Cave M was unimportant. What was important was the search. The desperate search for a way out, which Kenny Veach, unlike hundreds of his previous attempts, finally found. He simply went into the desert he loved, to a place where, as he promised, no one would ever find him again. Friends, thank you for watching the video to the end. Be sure to write in the comments how you like the new format. Don't forget to like it if you enjoyed this story. Take care, and see you in the next episodes.